Why do they make you feel guilty for needing basic respect? It's a simple question, but when you're in a relationship with a narcissist, it hits like a lightning bolt. One moment you're just asking for clarity, for honesty, for consideration. And the next you're apologizing. Not for being wrong, but for existing in a way that challenges their illusion of control. That's how it begins, not with screaming or violence, but with subtle distortion. You feel your reality shifting. You question your tone, your memory, your worth. And before you realize it, you're living in a world where the truth must first be approved by someone else before it feels real. This is what it's like to deal with a narcissist, not the dramatic stereotype, but the hidden kind. The ones who wear empathy like a mask. The ones who weaponize charm and silence with equal precision. The ones who don't destroy you loudly, but by making you destroy yourself, slowly, gently, invisibly. They don't enter your life shouting. They come in with sensitivity. They ask the right questions. They seem wounded, deep, familiar. You feel like you've found someone who finally gets it. And that's the hook. Because narcissists don't seek partners, they seek mirrors. And the moment you stop reflecting what they need, they begin to rewrite you. Piece by piece, moment by moment, they edit your soul to fit their fragile self-image. But here's the hard truth most people never say out loud. You can't fix a narcissist. You can't love them into empathy. You can't logic them into accountability. What you can do, what you must do, is learn how to deal with them without losing yourself. This video is not about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about understanding the patterns so you don't fall for them again. It's about setting boundaries so solid they become your sanctuary. And it's about learning how to speak in a language a narcissist cannot manipulate. Silence, clarity, and non-reactivity. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Narcissists survive on your unconscious wounds, your guilt, your empathy, your fear of abandonment. But the moment you make those wounds conscious, you become immune. In this video, you'll learn exactly how. So if you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too intense, too needy, when all you did was ask for truth, this is for you. Because the real problem was never your need. It was their fear of being seen. And once you understand that, the game changes forever. The greatest mistake people make when dealing with a narcissist is believing that logic can save them. That if you just explain yourself clearly enough, lovingly enough, patiently enough, they'll finally understand. But narcissists don't lack understanding. They lack accountability. And that is not something you can gift them. It is something they will avoid with every breath in their body. You could write them essays of your pain, record the patterns, quote their contradictions word for word, and still, they'll look at you like you're hysterical. Or worse, they'll agree with you, just to use it against you later. This is the trap. The narcissist doesn't argue to find truth. They argue to preserve power. Every conversation becomes a maze, crafted not to reach resolution, but to keep you disoriented. One moment, they're warm. The next, cold. They'll bait you into reacting, then accuse you of being emotional. They'll twist your boundaries into accusations. They'll shift blame so smoothly that you start apologizing for the very wounds they caused. And the more empathetic you are, the more dangerous it becomes. Because empaths aren't weak. But they do carry an ache, for connection, for peace, for repair. And narcissists exploit that ache like artists. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow teaches us that what we suppress or deny within ourselves doesn't disappear. It gets projected. Narcissists, unable to confront their own shame, project it onto those closest to them. That's why they attract empathic partners, not because they want to heal, but because they want someone to carry their darkness for them. Someone to blame. Someone to emotionally outsource the weight they refuse to hold. But here's the paradox. The narcissist often appears deeply wounded. And in many cases, they are. Childhood neglect. Emotional invalidation. Identity fractures. But pain is not an excuse for harm. And too many empathetic people stay in abusive dynamics because they believe their partner's trauma makes their cruelty understandable. This belief becomes a prison. You start believing that compassion means staying silent, that love means enduring cycles, that patience means waiting for potential. But none of that is healing. It's self-abandonment dressed in spiritual language. You can care about someone's past without surrendering your future. You can acknowledge their suffering without sacrificing your own. This is the first step in dealing with a narcissist, separating empathy from enabling. Understanding that your job is not to fix them, it's to protect you. The longer you stay in a narcissist's orbit, the more distorted your internal compass becomes. You begin to confuse chaos with passion. You start labeling neglect as independence. You interpret emotional inconsistency as depth. And worst of all, you normalize it. You convince yourself that this is just how relationships are. That emotional exhaustion is the price of intimacy. But it's not. It's the price of manipulation. And every moment you spend justifying their behavior, you're actually internalizing it. You're becoming the one who polices your tone, your tears, your needs, before they ever get the chance to reject them. It's a subtle conditioning, and it runs deep. You start walking on eggshells without realizing it. You scan their mood before speaking. You adjust your desires based on their convenience. And you carry the weight of the entire relationship while they take credit for the illusion of effort. But make no mistake, this is not love. It's emotional labor masquerading as connection. Carl Jung warned that neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. In the same way, narcissistic love is always a substitute for real intimacy. It mimics it, echoes it, but it never delivers. Because intimacy requires vulnerability, accountability, shared power, and the narcissist thrives on the opposite. So how do you deal with someone who weaponizes your every word? You don't out-argue them. You outgrow them. You stop trying to win the conversation and start listening to the impact. You realize that if someone consistently leaves you confused, drained, anxious, that is the message. That is the answer. Not their words. Not their apologies. Not their promises to do better. The truth is always in the pattern. Dealing with a narcissist begins not with confrontation, but with clarity. The clarity to name what's happening. The clarity to see through the performance. The clarity to admit that love shouldn't hurt like this. And once you have that clarity, the next step is detachment. Not always physical but always emotional. You stop seeking validation. You stop defending your truth. You stop expecting the person who broke you to be the one who fixes you. That's not giving up. That's waking up. And from that moment forward, everything changes, not because they become better, but because you finally believe you deserve better. And that belief, once it's rooted in you, is something no narcissist can ever touch again. To truly deal with a narcissist, you must first understand the battlefield. And it's not external, it's psychological. What you're navigating is not just difficult behavior. It's a deep-seated identity structure, rooted in fear, shame, and grandiosity. A narcissist isn't just someone who seeks admiration, they are someone who cannot function without it. Every interaction is a mirror. Every relationship is a performance. And when you stop playing your part, the mask begins to crack. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. For the narcissist, the persona isn't just a mask. It's a lifeline. They construct it meticulously, charming, successful, attentive, magnetic. But beneath it lies the shadow, the parts of themselves they've disowned. The self-hatred, the insecurity, the unworthiness. And the greater the gap between the mask and the shadow, the more violent their reactions when that mask is threatened. You see, most people react to conflict with discomfort. Narcissists react with annihilation. Not always outwardly, but internally. To them, being wrong isn't a mistake, it's a death of identity. Being criticized isn't a call for growth, it's an assault. This is why they deflect, deny, project. Not because they're unaware, but because their entire survival depends on being above reproach. This is the psychological engine of narcissism, fragility disguised as superiority. And when you love someone like this, you find yourself trapped in a loop. Every boundary feels like betrayal. Every need you express is seen as an accusation. And every time you ask for accountability, they pivot to victimhood. You're attacking me. You're never satisfied. You always think you're right. These aren't arguments. They're defense mechanisms. And the more you try to break through them with reason, the deeper the narcissist retreats into the fantasy that they are the misunderstood hero, and you, the villain who doesn't appreciate their greatness. This fantasy isn't just self-soothing. It's armor. Because narcissists don't want relationships, they want validation loops. They want people who reflect back their ideal self without ever challenging it. And the moment you step out of that role, when you stop laughing at the jokes that hurt you, stop nodding along with the lies, stop softening your truth, the narcissist feels exposed. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you forced them to see something they've spent their entire life avoiding: their own emptiness. This is where the emotional warfare begins. Because when the narcissist senses that their grip is loosening, that you're starting to see clearly, they activate what Carl Jung would call a projection spiral. They begin casting their internal chaos onto you. Suddenly, you're the manipulator. You're the one who's impossible to please. You're the unstable one. This isn't accidental, it's a calculated survival tactic. By projecting their own faults onto you, they avoid the unbearable task of facing themselves. And worse, if you're emotionally invested, you'll start defending yourself, explaining yourself, trying to be understood. And that's the trap. Because the moment you start explaining your integrity to someone committed to misunderstanding you, you've already lost the frame. Here's a pattern you'll see over and over again. They trigger you, wait for you to react, then use your reaction to discredit your original feeling. For example, let's say you calmly tell them, "When you disappeared for 2 days, it hurt me." Instead of acknowledging the harm, they respond, "Wow. I guess I'm just a terrible person, right?" Or worse, "You're so dramatic. I just needed space." And suddenly, you're backpedaling. You're soothing them. You're proving that you're not too much. This is not a discussion, it's a distortion field. And it's designed to make you doubt the very reality you started with. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." Narcissists are masters of that avoidance. And they recruit you into it, not as a partner, but as a shield. You become their emotional janitor, their scapegoat, their mirror. And the longer you stay, the more you begin to internalize their disowned parts as your own. Their shame becomes your insecurity. Their rage becomes your fear. Their indifference becomes your silence. This is the psychological corrosion of a narcissistic dynamic. Not just that it wounds you, but that it rewrites you. One of the most dangerous triggers for a narcissist is your autonomy. Not loud defiance. Not confrontation. Just quiet, grounded self-possession. When you stop reacting. When you stop chasing. When you sit in your truth without asking for permission to believe it. That's when their mask begins to slip completely. They might mock you. They might accuse you of being cold or disconnected. But what they're really saying is, "I can't control you anymore." And that terrifies them. Because control is their currency. Not love. Not intimacy. Control. And when you stop being predictable, when you no longer jump through the emotional hoops they set, that's when you become powerful. Let's walk through a moment that terrifies the narcissist: indifference. Not anger, not pleading, not even leaving, but indifference. You come home late and don't explain yourself. You don't pick up their calls the second they ring. You start doing things that bring you peace, and you don't announce it. There is no performance to decode, no drama to exploit. Just silence. This is the moment the narcissist feels the shift. Not because you're being cruel, but because for the first time, you are not emotionally available to their chaos. You are no longer the mirror. You are no longer the caretaker. You are simply yourself. Let's illustrate with a classic scenario. Imagine the narcissist tries to bait you. Wow, you really don't care anymore, do you? Your old self might have rushed to explain. Of course I care, I've just been overwhelmed. But your awakened self responds with calm clarity. I care deeply, just not at the expense of my sanity. That one sentence, said without venom, breaks their script. It's not the content, it's the energy. They can't manipulate clarity. They can't spin peace. And so, they panic. Another common trigger. When you validate yourself. Narcissists thrive on your need for their approval. If they sense you're looking for reassurance, they'll withhold it, just to keep you reaching. But the moment you say, I trust my decision, or I know what I felt, their system short-circuits. Not because they don't understand your words, but because they no longer have leverage. You've stepped out of the frame. You've stopped dancing to the music only they could hear. And here's the deeper truth. Narcissists do not fear being alone. They fear being irrelevant. They don't miss you because they love you. They miss you because you were useful to their identity. And once you're no longer a source of supply, no longer the empath who overgives, overexplains, overcompensates, they're forced to sit with the self they've spent a lifetime avoiding. That's the real confrontation. Not the words you speak, but the space you create when you stop needing to be understood. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the process of becoming whole, is about integrating the shadow, not rejecting it. When you deal with a narcissist, your task isn't to fix their shadow. It's to face your own. To ask, what part of me was drawn to this dynamic? What unmet need made me stay? What story about love do I still carry that made this feel familiar? And when you answer that, not with shame, but with compassion, you reclaim your power. Because now, the narcissist is no longer a threat. They are simply a mirror you no longer need. And that, ultimately, is how you deal with them. Not through punishment, but through presence. Not through rage, but through reality. Not by proving your worth, but by embodying it so fully that manipulation no longer finds a foothold. That's not just dealing with a narcissist. That's transcending them. Her name was Lila. And if you saw her on the street 3 years ago, you'd see someone radiant, always smiling, always attentive, always making sure everyone else was okay. What you wouldn't see was the exhaustion behind her eyes, the emotional bruises she couldn't name, the slow unraveling of a woman who had spent years shrinking herself to fit inside someone else's world. She met Adrian at a mutual friend's book launch. He was magnetic, funny, eloquent, with just enough darkness to seem deep. He talked about healing, about emotional intelligence, about how he had been misunderstood in past relationships. Lila, a naturally empathic woman, heard his pain and saw potential. She mistook his self-pity for vulnerability, his silence for depth, his aloofness for mystery. In the beginning, it was perfect. He listened, intently, remembered everything she said, brought her flowers on Tuesdays just because it was her midweek slump. She had never felt so seen. But slowly, imperceptibly, the weather began to change. One day, he made a joke at her expense in front of friends. She laughed, brushed it off. Another day, he questioned her memory. I never said that. Are you sure you're not just being sensitive? Still another day, he disappeared emotionally, aloof, distracted, cold, until she asked if everything was okay. His response. Why do you always make everything about you? And like that, the shift was complete. The man who once saw her became the man who distorted her. And because the change was gradual, she stayed. Tried harder. Became more agreeable. Silenced her voice just a little more each time, hoping to return to the sweetness of the early days. She believed, like many empaths do, that if she could just love him right, he would heal. What she didn't understand then was that narcissists don't want healing, they want control. And the more she tried, the more power she handed him. The turning point wasn't dramatic. There was no explosive fight. No confession. It was a Tuesday evening. He had ignored her texts all day. When he walked in, she asked gently, "Is everything okay?" He looked at her like she was a burden. "You're exhausting," he said. "Everything with you is just too much." And something inside her snapped, not with rage, but with clarity. She looked at him and realized, this was not love. This was a performance. And she was done being the audience. That night, Lila didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't try to explain herself again. Instead, she sat in silence, tracing the emotional roadmap of the last 2 years like puzzle pieces falling into place. Every apology she had made that wasn't hers to give. Every plan she had cancelled to avoid his moods. Every time she silenced her truth for the sake of keeping peace. And she realized something terrifying. She had lost herself. Not all at once. But slowly. Strategically. She had become a ghost in her own life. The next morning, she did something small, but revolutionary. She turned off her phone. She sat by the window and made a list. Not of his flaws, but of her needs. Safety. Honesty. Consistency. Reciprocity. Words that once felt like luxuries now felt like minimums. And as she stared at the list, she whispered a sentence that changed everything. "I am not hard to love. I've just been loving the wrong person." From that point forward, she began a quiet rebellion. She didn't confront Adrian. She didn't announce her awakening. She simply stopped playing the role. When he made passive-aggressive remarks, she didn't react, just left the room. When he tried to guilt her for taking time for herself, she didn't defend, just smiled and kept walking. And when he pulled out the nostalgic manipulation, "Remember how good we were in the beginning?" She answered with silence. That silence, she learned, was louder than any argument. Because it meant she no longer needed to prove her pain. She believed it. And that belief was her liberation. She started writing again. Reached out to old friends she had drifted from. Went to therapy. She even booked a solo trip, a quiet cabin tucked into the woods. No signal. No distractions. Just herself. And for the first time in years, she slept through the night without anxiety clawing at her chest. Healing, she discovered, wasn't a grand event. It was a series of small, consistent choices that said, "I matter." Choices like blocking his number, not in anger, but in reverence for her peace. Like deleting old voice notes she used to replay, hoping to find proof she wasn't crazy. Like removing photos from her walls, not to forget, but to reclaim the space. Each step was an exhale. Each day, a return. Not to who she was before, but to someone wiser. Softer. Clearer. The kind of woman who no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. The kind of woman who knows that love should never cost her voice. Lila's transformation didn't end with leaving, it deepened with remembering. Remembering that love is not supposed to feel like survival. That being in a relationship shouldn't require her to erase her own needs in exchange for crumbs of affection. That walking away is not failure. Sometimes, it's the most courageous declaration of self-worth. Months passed. The silence from Adrian became louder, more erratic. A string of texts appeared, some nostalgic, some guilt-tripping, some laced with faux vulnerability. "I've been thinking about us. I'm working on myself. You always saw the best in me." But Lila had done her work. She had read the literature, understood the cycle, and most importantly, she had learned to regulate the part of herself that once equated longing with loyalty. So she didn't respond, not because she was bitter, but because she was healed. Her friends noticed the shift first. The way her shoulders sat higher, her laugh returned from the hollow place it used to hide. She wasn't guarded, she was grounded. And though she was alone, she didn't feel lonely. For the first time in years, she felt accompanied by herself. Her inner child, her future self, her present wholeness, all sitting at the same table, finally speaking the same language, truth. Lila didn't build walls. She built discernment. She didn't become cold. She became clear. She didn't close her heart. She just changed who had access to it. And when people asked her what she learned from the experience, she said this: never confuse being chosen with being cherished. Narcissists choose you for utility. But those who cherish you see your soul, and never ask you to shrink. And that was it. Her freedom didn't come from closure, it came from clarity. And that clarity became her compass. Now, when she meets someone new, she listens for the silences between their words. She watches how they respond to her boundaries. She doesn't overshare. She doesn't overgive. She simply observes. Because she knows now, real love doesn't rush you. It doesn't perform. And it never, ever makes you feel like your wholeness is too much. Just when you think it's over, when you've reclaimed your clarity, rebuilt your strength, and finally stopped checking your phone for their name, that's when they return. Not always physically. Sometimes it's a message, a memory, a mutual friend casually dropping their name. But often, it's them, slithering back with surgical precision, cloaked not in arrogance, but in softness. This isn't the narcissist you remember, the one who gaslit, dismissed, dominated. No. This version is wounded, humble, almost tender. And it's not an accident. It's a tactic. Their final act. The last performance in a script designed to pull you back into the illusion that they've changed. This is what we call manufactured vulnerability. Suddenly, they're talking about childhood wounds, therapy sessions, late-night regrets. They might say, "I finally see what I did to you," or, "No one ever loved me the way you did." It sounds like a breakthrough. It feels like redemption. But here's the truth, it's not an apology, it's bait. Because true accountability doesn't beg for access. It respects distance. It honors the damage. And above all, it doesn't center their pain in your healing. This tactic is especially effective on empaths. You who crave meaning, who believe in second chances, who were taught that forgiveness is the highest form of love. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Because just as you've steadied yourself, just as the fog has lifted, the narcissist offers you a mirage, a fantasy of repair. And if you're not careful, you'll walk right back into the desert, thirsting for closure, only to find more confusion. Let's examine another tactic, nostalgic manipulation. They won't beg directly. Instead, they'll remind you of the good times. The trip to the coast. The inside jokes. The song you both loved. You'll hear things like, "We had something rare," or "Remember how we used to laugh until midnight." And in that moment, your body forgets the betrayal. It remembers the laughter, the closeness, the chemistry. But nostalgia is a liar. It filters out the nights you cried alone, the days you walked on eggshells, the versions of yourself you had to kill just to survive. The narcissist counts on your memory being selective, on your healing still being fragile. That's why their return is never random. It's timed. They feel your absence, not because they miss you, but because your detachment threatens their control. And control is everything. Without it, their identity begins to unravel. So they must reclaim the stage. And if they can't do it through domination, they'll do it through softness. But there's a darker twist to their final act, emotional guilt tripping. When nostalgia and false vulnerability don't work, they pivot to blame wrapped in sentiment. You gave up on me. After everything we shared, you just walked away. I guess I was never enough for you. These aren't cries for connection. They're strategic darts aimed at your empathy. Because if they can't seduce your heart, they'll manipulate your conscience. And if you respond, defending, explaining, comforting, they win. Not because you've come back physically, but because you've re-entered the emotional game. And once you're in it again, the cycle resets. The danger of falling for these tactics isn't just emotional, it's psychological fragmentation. You start questioning your own growth. Was I too harsh? Too quick to leave? You reread old messages, trying to decode sincerity from strategy. You start doubting your clarity. And that's how they regain access, not to your life, but to your mind. Because for the narcissist, Being in control of your thoughts is far more powerful than holding your hand. Carl Jung warned that the shadow will rise with greater force the more it is denied. And this is the secret behind the narcissist's final trick. They do not return because they've seen the light. They return because their shadow is starving. And you, the empath, have always been its favorite meal. Your softness, your compassion, your belief that people can change. These are beautiful qualities, but they are not invitations to self-betray. So what happens if you let them back in? The cycle resumes. But this time, it cuts deeper. Because now you know better. Now you've tasted freedom. Now you've seen the mask fall. And returning after that, returning in the name of hope or loyalty or love, feels like swallowing glass and calling it wine. The confusion will be sharper. The self-betrayal more bitter. The exit more painful. Because you're not just leaving them again, you're trying to forgive yourself for abandoning your truth. So how do you protect yourself? One word: boundaries. Not just verbal but energetic. Not just blocking their number, but blocking the fantasy. Not just avoiding their presence, but releasing the version of them you created in your longing. Remember, the narcissist doesn't miss you. They miss what you gave: attention, validation, a mirror. And when you stop providing that, their need is not to reconnect, it's to reclaim. But you are not a source. You are a soul. And the most powerful thing you can do when the narcissist shows up for their final act is not to watch. Not to applaud. Not to react. Just to walk away. Quietly, fully, finally. At some point in your journey, you stop asking why they did what they did. You stop chasing explanations from people who built their entire identity on illusion. You stop trying to translate manipulation into love. Instead, you look inward, not to blame yourself, but to reclaim the parts of you that were silenced in the process. And that's where the true healing begins. Dealing with a narcissist is not just surviving abuse, it's awakening to the truth of who you are. It forces you to confront the unconscious scripts you've carried, the belief that love must be earned, that your needs are too much, that silence is safer than confrontation. These were never your truths. They were distortions inherited through pain. And every time you accepted less than you deserved, you reinforced a lie about your worth. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The narcissist may have entered your life as a romantic partner, a parent, a friend. But symbolically, they represent something much deeper, a confrontation with your shadow. The part of you that fears abandonment. That craves validation. That believes harmony is more important than authenticity. And the moment you begin to integrate that shadow, not reject it but understand it, is the moment you stop being a magnet for narcissistic control. You don't escape a narcissist by outsmarting them. You escape by becoming someone they can no longer manipulate. Someone who is no longer reactive, no longer addicted to the cycle of approval and rejection. Someone who recognizes love not by its intensity, but by its consistency. And that requires rewiring your nervous system, your self-image, your internal compass. Because here's the secret: narcissists don't target the weak. They target the strong who are unaware of their strength. The empath who hasn't yet realized that their sensitivity is not a flaw, it's a superpower. The giver who hasn't yet learned that boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. The loyal heart who hasn't yet grasped that being available to everyone is not compassion, it's self-erasure. So what does life look like after you truly let go? It looks quieter, slower. At first, it might even feel boring, because there's no chaos to decode, no drama to survive. But eventually, that quiet becomes sacred. You learn to trust your body again. To speak your truth without rehearsing. To rest without guilt. And love, when it comes again, feels like a return, not a rescue. The real triumph isn't that you escaped the narcissist. It's that you chose yourself in a world that taught you to abandon who you are to be loved. You broke a cycle older than you. You stood at the edge of a familiar abyss and didn't jump. You turned around. You walked away. And in doing so, you became someone your past self would hardly recognize, but deeply admire. But this story isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's ever felt trapped in a dynamic that made them question their sanity. Everyone who mistook manipulation for intimacy. Everyone who stayed too long, not out of weakness, but out of hope. To you, this is your call to rise. To see your scars not as evidence of failure, but as proof that you survived something designed to destroy you. You weren't broken. You were broken open. If the narcissist taught you anything, let it be this. You are allowed to walk away without explaining. You are allowed to say no without guilt. You are allowed to outgrow people who refuse to grow. And most of all, you are allowed to be whole without seeking permission. The narcissist wanted you confused because clarity is liberation. They wanted you reactive because calm is power. They wanted you desperate because wholeness cannot be controlled. But now, you know. You know the signs. You've seen behind the mask. And you'll never forget the cost of forgetting yourself. So here's the final warning. If they return, don't engage. Don't argue. Don't revisit. You've already read that chapter. You know how it ends. Choose instead to write a new one. One where love feels like safety. Where truth feels like freedom. Where you never again have to shrink in order to be seen. And as you walk forward, remember, healing doesn't mean you forget the lesson. It means you embody the wisdom. It means you hold your standards like a sacred flame. It means you no longer settle for people who only love the idea of you. You wait for the ones who honor the reality of you. Because you are not too sensitive. Not too much. Not too complicated. You are simply someone who now knows how to protect their peace. And that is a power no narcissist can ever steal again. If these words echoed something inside you, don't walk away in silence. Subscribe to the channel. Not because I asked, but because you owe it to yourself to keep rising. This space isn't about noise. It's about awakening. And if you've come this far, you already know, you don't belong with the crowd. You belong with the few who master themselves. So stay. The next chapter is waiting.